How the Miami Dolphins moves this offseason impacted their salary cap outlook for 2025. We're looking a year in advance here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting. You can find our shows on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Tip of the cap to our everydayers, because we don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. It is your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase on last-minute tickets with the lowest prices. Guaranteed. It's Thursday, June 13th, 2024. So what better time to look at the 2025 salary cap update than June? And here's the clue. It is that weird 6-week limbo where mini camp's done, training camp's a ways away. We're going to look at everything. We're going to talk about a whole bunch of stuff in this window of the calendar, because once training camp starts, we're going to be pedal to the metal as far as training camp and keeping up with the Joneses of training camp. Or I guess it would the keeping up with the Joneses is a more appropriate version of that for the Dolphins. Would probably be keeping up with the Jalens, right? With every Jalen that's on this roster. But I know one of the big concerns that a lot of people have about paying players and not paying players and who can you afford to keep and who are you going to have to let walk. One of the questions that always comes back is like, what is the long-term ramifications? What is your long-term salary cap health outlook look like? And it's a fair question to ask, and it's hard because there are teams there's resources that are committed to covering the salary cap, like Spot Track and overthecap.com, and they are individually outstanding resources with different pros and cons for each website. But the tracking of the salary cap can be a little bit more finicky than that. There's times where certain contracts have stipulated money that kicks in. There's times where there's player options that you want to be able to anticipate. There's the whole growth of the salary cap, which is a little challenging because, like overthecap.com, for example, this year's salary cap is $255 million. Their projected salary cap for 2025 is $260 million. I can give you a hint, a little tip. The cap's going to go up more than $4 million. It's $4.5 million this year. It just went up $30 million from last year to this year. So, I have my own tabling and tracking of all the Dolphins' commitments, and I'll pull it up for those of you who are watching on YouTube. And if you're listening, no worries. We got you covered. I'm going to talk through all of this information anyway. But I am kind of operating under the assumption that the salary cap, for my table, there's going to be a $17 million growth annually per season. Right. And it's probably going to be more than that, but I try to be more conservative and shoot on the underside of the forecasted numbers as compared to shooting above and beyond. Right. I would hate to do, whether it's a contract forecast or a salary cap forecast or a restructure ability, and come out here and be way too aggressive and say, yeah, the Dolphins could do X, Y, and Z. And in reality, they can only do 60% of that. And then I gave you guys an unrealistic expectation for what it's going to look like. So I always try to be conservative. So when we do the offseason blueprint, I try to say free agents are going to cost on the upper end of their range and scale. The salary cap, I will try to, from a growth perspective, forecast it a more conservative approach. And then that way, when reality hits, and you get a lot healthier of a number one way or another, you can feel pretty good about it. Because we you hope for the best and plan for the worst. Right. So right now, my salary cap figures for the top 51 for the Dolphins, I have Chop Robinson's contract numbers assumed here on the books, and that's the thing about the rookie wage scale, the way that it is these days, you can pretty much know where the finances are going to check in. It's more a question of what offset language is in the contract. Are there guarantees within the contract as far as what percent of the contract is guaranteed? But you get a percentage of the rookie wage pie is what you get based on where you get drafted. So I have the Dolphins at about 17 after signing Chop Robinson, and we're still waiting to figure out, at least at the time of this recording, what the terms are of the Marcus May contract. And there's going to have to, I don't think it's been signed yet because the team hasn't announced it yet. And when the team announces it, they're going to have to cut somebody. So the gymnastics that play through that are one to watch. But your 51st player, and remember in the offseason, only 51 players count against the cap. Your 51st player right now is River Craycraft, assuming the Chop Robinson contract gets done at $1.1 million. So anything that Marcus May signs for above that amount is what the Dolphins are going to have to allocate for against the cap. If I had to guess, it probably won't be much above that. Especially because like Jordan Poyer's on the books for a little under 2 this year. But you have the Dolphins sitting at about 17 after the Chop Robinson contract, $17.7 million in cap space. Assuming a $17 million cap growth from 2024 to 2025, Dolphins have about $5.5 million in cap space right now. I remember last year going in, or this offseason going in, this time last year, you're looking at it saying, hey guys, they're about minus $40 million in cap space for 2024. That doesn't feel very good. So, you're at least starting at a much higher floor, closer to the baseline of 0 before you make any personnel moves. And we'll talk about new flexibility. We'll talk about 2025 commitments as well. But the one thing I wanted to get to before the break was we got more specific. We thought we did a whole Jalen Waddle gets his contract extension show, and then it was the full terms of the Jalen Waddle contract came out. Well, overthecap.com has an updated version of the Jalen Waddle contract. And this is of interest to me because there's 2 void years. And we could do the Pee Wee's Playhouse thing. You get the word of the day and everybody freaks out. Right? And void years feels like this year's episode of Pee Wee's Playhouse / Locked On Dolphins. Word of the day is void years. So everybody, lose your minds. We're talking void years here on Locked On Dolphins. There's 2 void years on the back end of the Jalen Waddle contract, according to overthecap.com. They prorated out into 2029 and 2020 or 2030 $6.05 and then $3.08 million respectively in cap. So if Waddle leaves the team after 2028 and 2029, they would carry about a $9 million dead cap hit. Now, $9 million dead cap hit in 2029 based on salary cap growth. Throw a couple bucks in the air. Wipe your rear end with it, flush down the toilet. That's about going to be the equivalence because of the rate of the salary cap growth, especially because that's going to be around the time the new collective bargaining agreement stuff starts coming through. But nevertheless, it's important. They still made a decision to put 2 void years on the back end of this deal and to prorate out an additional $9 million. You feel it on the front end. 2024, his salary cap hit is still $9.09 million. 2025, 2026, the 2 years that overlap with Tyreek Hill now, 8.02, $11.65 million in cap hit. So Jalen Waddle signs this 3-year, $84.75 million contract. And the first 3 years of salary cap hits, 9.09, 8.02, $11.65 million. I mean, that's 3.6, 3.1, and 4.1% against the current cap is the percentage of cap of those first 3 years of this new contract situation for Jalen Waddle, what he's going to be against the Bucs. They kept a lot of space open from 24 to 26. I'll say that. And of course, you remember Tyreek Hill is under contract through 2026. Isn't that interesting? So I remember one of the talking points that we had was Jalen Waddle at the end of the new contract was going to be on the books against the cap in 2028 for less cap space than what Tyreek Hill is currently against the cap for in 2024. That's no longer the case. This peaks in 2028 with a $37.2 million void cap hit because they pushed more of it out, right? They did the player option thing again. We get the guaranteed salary, but the guaranteed salary is a player option that's automatically prorated out and spread out across 5 seasons, which I'm all for with a player like this, who's in the prime of his career, elite route runner. I think this contract will age quite gracefully for Miami. But I think in the first, whatever time is left that it overlaps with with Tyreek Hill, I do think it's probably going to be a contract that is more proportionate to the production. And then you're going to get to the back end of it where it's backloaded a little bit more. And that's where you probably expect Jalen Waddle will put up some numbers that look probably close to what Tyreek Hill has done lately. So I thought that was very interesting to get that additional info because for the table, the roster and salary cap table that I did, I had to update those numbers. And I'm like, wow, it went down significantly. They carved out more flexibility for 2025 and 2026 against the salary cap space. And that can be another one of our Pee Wee's Playhouse buzzwords when we're talking about the cap is flexibility, right? We're going to talk more about flexibility in 2025 commitments, what that looks like here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. Make sure that you stick with us. Going to the game is not supposed to be stressful. You love your sporting events. You love your live music. You love theater. Whatever you love, you can get your tickets courtesy of Gametime and do so spontaneously and without the stress. You could save up to 60% off buying last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. They have flash deals and zone deals to help you save even more money. And they have all-in pricing, so there's no surprises when you put your tickets into the cart and go to checkout. No fees that catch you off guard and double what you were expecting to pay. The Gametime guarantee gives you the lowest tickets. If you find lower tickets in the same row and section for less, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDONNFL, for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. I would like to think I can promise that I'm not going to do the Pee Wee's Playhouse bit again, but I don't think I have that level of impulse control. So just hope it doesn't come up again, would be what I say. So let's talk about the 2025 commitments. And this kind of got spurred on a little bit because yesterday on the show, I ended up talking about who has the most to gain and most to lose, like who has the most at stake for Dolphins veteran players, and names like Raheem Mostert came up, right? Because he's on the books for just over $4.05 million. It's $4.065 million against the cap in 2025 is what will be a 33-year-old running back that you could save over $3 million against the cap if you moved on from. So commitments like that are notable because I have the Dolphins in plus territory right now. But they're going to have to give a contract to Tua Tagovailoa at some point. You're expecting they're going to give a contract to Tua Tagovailoa at some point. They have to do something with the Tyreek Hill contract. And the dollars, it has shifted suddenly. So I'll go ahead and we'll read through who the top commitments are that the Dolphins have against the cap. Tyreek Hill, Bradley Chubb, Jalen Ramsey, Teron Armstead are the only players currently under contract for 2025 that carry a salary cap commitment of more than $13.8 million against the cap. That's it. Hill, Chubb, Ramsey, Armstead. Now, your expectation would tell you Tua Tagovailoa is probably going to be on the list. That would be the first year of his new contract. Even if they give him a signing bonus and they structure it a certain way, that cap hit should still check in around $20 million. So I would expect him to be there. We talked yesterday. Bradley Chubb was another name that came up as a player that has a lot at stake. There's exit ramps post June 1st where you could save as much as $20 million against the cap by moving on from Bradley Chubb next offseason. Tron Armstead, if he's going to retire, and I know he spoke at training camp and OTAs, and minicamp, I should say, and alluded to it's no guarantee this is his last year, but he did take the time thinking about what he wanted to do. I kind of expect this is the last year in Miami with how they rework this contract for this upcoming season. Teron, for all intents and purposes, like took a pay cut. And if he does continue playing, and it is in Miami, I would expect something similar again. So I expect that cap number to come down, right? But as of right now, that is one of the 4 marquee contracts on the books. This has become a much more middle-class type of distribution of contracts as you look across and you see salary cap hits for Phillips with his 5th-year option at 13.25. Austin Jackson in what would be year 2 of his new contract, his 3-year contract extension with 13.8. Sealer at 11.2. Brooks at 10. Kendall Fuller, Aaron Brewer, Jalen Waddle. Those guys are all between $8 and $8.5 million cap hits. And then you got Ingold and Smythe and Sanders and Jonnu Smith and Kader Kohu, as I'm projecting him as a restricted free agent to get a tender. Shaq Barrett's void money. These are all between $4.5 and $5 million. It's become less of peaks and valleys. It's filled in a little bit more. Now there's still peaks with Tyreek at 34 and Chubb at 29 and Ramsey at 28. And these are cap hits and not cash. It's important to remember that. And then you're going to potentially get some new contracts. You got to figure out what you're doing with David Long. You got to figure out what you're doing with Javon Holland. You got to figure out what you're doing with Tua Tagovailoa. Like the list goes on, right? Like, and some of those guys are going to pop up in this area again. And that's why it's important to remember that there is long-term flexibility with the assets that you are committed to right now. And when the guaranteed dollars run out, it's important to bear that in mind. Because as of right now, this includes Jalen Phillips' 5th-year option, which is a number that can go down if you give a contract extension done. I have Kader Kohu and Keon Smith both getting restricted free agent tenders for 2025. I have a $17 million salary cap growth. And the current players that I have on the books currently under contract, you're looking at about $5.5 million in cap space. That's without Holland and Long and Tagovailoa is kind of the 3 most notable departing players. Other players that are expiring contracts for 2025, Jordan Poyer, Liam Eichenberg, Isaiah Wynn, Duke Riley, Braxton Berrios, Jeff Wilson, Robert Jones, Benito Jones, Mike White, River Craycraft. Okay, so it's not as imposing of a list, provided that if you take care of Tagovailoa, Holland, and Long at earlier than letting them test the market, and they might choose to let 1 or 2 of those guys test the market. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the free agency list is less intimidating, and your floor, as far as where you're starting to get a cap compliant and have space to attack the offseason, is in a healthier place because you are closer to middle. And then you still have a Bradley Chubb exit ramp. You still have I'm not going to do the thing before the thing. That's what we're going to talk about next. We're going to talk about what your flexibility looks like next on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. One contract they do not have the flexibility with is the Jalen Waddle contract because they chose to go the option bonus that's automatically prorated out for his guaranteed money standpoint. So he's getting minimum salaries for the next 3 years as far as like your week-by-week game checks and getting lump sum paychecks. So they're effectively restructuring the contract before they make the decision to restructure the contract. They just wrote it all in when they wrote the contract. Because they're like, yeah, this guy's going to be here a while. They put their money where their mouth is. But there is flexibility to be had. And we're going to get into that next here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. Make sure you stick with us. All right. So let's talk about what the Dolphins can do with their salary cap flexibility, knowing that you're going to have a quarterback contract that's probably going to be rolling in that, uh, at least for 2025, would probably check in between 15 and 20, $22 million in cap space. I would be my guess for how that's going to work out for 2025. Right. So that with your cap space, you're now negative. So you know you're going to create need to create some cap space. And that's before Javon Holland. And that's before David Long. I would like to make the point, though, that we mentioned on yesterday's show as well, Antoine Winfield Jr. got a market reset contract against for defensive backs. His salary cap hit this year is $8 million. So, like, getting a guy like Holland with a competitive contract that would be, I would assume, lower than that figure, but getting him under contract is not going to be like, oh, we just broke our cap situation, right? Like, that's just kind of especially if he's going to check in at around where you would assume Xavier McKinney checked in as far as like the top free agent safety signing. His cap hit this year was $7.8 million. So, you'll probably, if you brought back all three guys, you'd probably need about $35 million in cap space to accommodate them. But you have five with what I have on my table right now. So the question is, where else can you get those dollars to give you a little bit more peace of mind with your investments? And what kind of flexibility do you have? You can do a lot with the Tyreek situation. I don't know how much I want to assume there, just because we don't know what Tyreek's we don't know what his outlook is going to be for how his money gets moved around. I would say if you moved on from him next offseason with his current contract, you could do so at any given point and save $11.5 million against the cap. You would carry a $22 million dead cap hit for 2025, and then be clear of that unless you post June 1st did something in which you'd be clear $23 million and then carry a little bit of extra dead cap in 2026. So that helps. It doesn't help you all the way. Bradley Chubb, it's kind of the same deal. Your move on from Bradley Chubb, assuming there's not another injury there, would be a post-June 1st type of move. You could save $2 million if you moved on from him, but you would carry $27 million dead cap hit in 2025. But if you June 1st did it, what you would end up doing is saving 20.23 against the cap. You would end up taking on a $9.11 million dead money hit, and you would create $20 million in cap space. And then you would carry, you would free up another 10 and change for 2026 as well. So you would carry, just call it 11 for even numbers. And it helps your outlook for the next 3 years in 2025, 2026, and 2027 as a result. Pretty significant way with the Bradley Chubb contract. So that's one way. We've talked about extending Jalen Ramsey. He currently has a lot of money voided out on the back end of his contract for 2026. It's several years worth of void money that it only accelerates and comes into 1 year if he's no longer on the team. I would do a contract extension with Jalen Ramsey. And the $26 million hit that he has for 2025 would go down, probably fairly significantly. And the void money that he's committed to right now in 2026 of $18.5 million, that would get cut into thirds. And it'll be like $6.1 million here, $6.1 million in 2027, and $6.1 million in 2028. Not a math guy, but my years are wrong at the top. It's going to bother me. I got to do it. The OCD of me kicking in. You can restructure guys like Zach Sealer. You can restructure guys like Austin Jackson. You can restructure a guy like Jordan Brooks. They are guys that all have multiple years left in their contract going into 2025. That can create some meaningful salary cap space for you. If you, for example, for Austin Jackson, it would be $7.3 million. For Zach Sealer, it would be $4.6 million that you could save. We mentioned Raheem Mostert. If you moved on from Raheem next offseason, you'd save $3 million in cap space there. For Durham Smythe, you'd save $2.2 million in cap space there. If you restructured Jordan Brooks, you'd save $5 million in cap space. So just restructuring Brooks, Sealer, and Jackson gets you $16 million in cap space. You throw Mostert and Smythe in there. It's the only two players that you've moved on from that were under contract. And if you feel good about Jonnu Smith, and if you feel good about what you have with Jalen Wright and Devon Achane, you feel like you have young guys stepping into those roles. That's it. That's $20 million in cap space for restructuring a couple of guys that are not the big contracts. They're the middle class guys that you'd be pushing out more. And then you could have a big infusion with a Bradley Chubb type of maneuver, or potentially a Jalen Ramsey contract extension, which would give you the operating space that you would need to then conduct an offseason that looks similar to what this year's offseason did. And again, this is with a conservative salary cap forecast. So I'm telling you, you could restructure a handful of middle-class guys, extend Jalen Ramsey, and move on from Raheem Mostert at 33 years old and Durham Smythe, and have the cap space to accommodate Tagovailoa, Holland, and David Long contracts, and have a comparable offseason type strategy to what you did this year. Oh, by the way, you got more draft picks at your disposal next year as well. Like that's why they've chosen to play the game the way that they've chosen to play the game. They very easily could have said, yeah, we're going to re-sign everybody and we're going to max restructure everybody and we're going to put ourselves in HE double hockey sticks against the salary cap 4 years from now. But darn it, we're going to ride this thing into the ground. They're threading the needle of a moving target. Whether you agree with it or not, that's why they've done it that way. I hope that's what these kinds of conversations illustrates for the Dolphins. Much healthier situation than last offseason. And we didn't even talk about Teron Armstead. Who, like, if he's going to retire, great. If he's not going to retire, he's going to get designated, I would assume, as a post-June first cut. And the Dolphins are going to move on, and they're going to save $14.3 million in cap space in 2025, and then they're going to save another $10 million in cap space in 2026. Like that's not small money. That's pretty significant dollars. So there you have it. Dolphins pretty flexible. Word of the day. Pretty flexible against the salary cap. And the things that they have alluded to with a sustained long-term winner and having cycles within their competitive windows, you're seeing that realize. And the objective is not to fly too close to the sun where your wings melt off and then you come crashing all the way back down and have to start over again. Because that's what the old Dolphins did. That's what the teams like the Saints have done. We'll see if anybody in the AFC East has done that with their approach in the last few years. But I'll tell you this, if a team has done it, it ain't going to be the Dolphins. And it doesn't matter who's told you what about all in or exhausting all of your outlook. Is the peak talent on the team this year across the board better than it was last year? No. Is the team still very competitive? Should the team still expect to win double-digit games and contend to win the division and potentially host home playoff games and see what happens from there? Yes. It's like the teams like Baltimore last year peaked as well, and then they're trying to compete through the transition window. We're seeing the Dolphins do that instead of exhausting the window and then having to run out a 2019 squad all over again. It's going to do it for us here today on Locked On Dolphins. I appreciate you guys checking out the show. Make sure you keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. You can find us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Make it a great rest of your day. I'm out of here. Fins up.